with the Hartford Foundation's Nonprofit Support Program, and I want to welcome you all to the kickoff of our spring workshop season. We hope that you're all doing well and staying healthy, and we're really looking forward to the day when we can all gather again in person, hopefully soon. So just to make sure you're in the right place, today's session is on the topic of how to develop and lead successful virtual sessions, primarily webinars. And I will say that one thing we've learned over the past year is that Zoom sessions are definitely a team sport. So special thanks, as always, to my wonderful NSP teammates, Betsy Johnson and Monica Kelly, for all of their behind-the-scenes assistance and great teamwork in planning for and managing the logistics for today's sessions and all of our sessions. And since it's a question that always comes up, we will be sharing the session recording as well as the slides with all of you following today's session. And also, Betsy will be posting the survey for this session in the chat towards the end, and she will also be sending you the survey immediately following the session. It's the only price of admission, and we really do value your feedback and take your comments to heart. So please do take a few minutes and complete the survey after the session. Our presenter will also be sticking around immediately following today's session for what we call after class time. So if there are questions that we can't get to during the session, you'll have another more intimate opportunity right after we end, but he will be pausing as we go through the session to take questions as we go. So I'm delighted that our presenter today is Andy Goodman, who is co-founder and director of the Goodman Center in California. So it's actually morning for them over there. And some of you may recognize Andy from the webinar on webinars that he led for us last June, as well as from a storytelling in-person workshop he did for us several years ago. So since last June's webinar on webinars, Andy has conducted extensive research to determine what people's thoughts and needs were after we had all been thrust into this world of virtual meetings and webinars last year. And he'll be sharing some of the results of that study as we go through today's session. And assisting Andy today is his colleague, Kirsten Farrell, who's been on the job, I think, 3 days. So welcome, Andy and Kirsten, and the program is all yours.
Thank you very much, Mayor. And Kirsten, good morning from Los Angeles.
Good morning.
Welcome, everybody. This is the first time you are participating in a webinar from the Goodman Center. We are here to help you reach more people with more impact, and we've been doing that since 1998. We're very pleased to be with you here today. We're using Zoom today, but we never assume that everybody knows exactly what to do. So let me tell you how we're using Zoom for this webinar today. Here's what the platform looks like, right? If you want to mute, just move your cursor. If you don't see your controls, just move that cursor. You'll see the controls appear at the bottom of the screen. And if you haven't already, please move that cursor over and mute your line. We'll ask you if you want to speak to unmute, but for now, everyone should be muted. If you want to chat, and we're going to be asking you to chat several times throughout the webinar, just click on the chat box and the chat will appear, to the chat icon, and the chat box will appear. And as far as having your camera on and or off, that's up to you. If you're more comfortable having it on, if you like seeing yourself and other people, go ahead and do that. If you'd rather have it off, whether it's for privacy or you just don't want us to see how you're dressed today, that's fine too. Whatever makes you most comfortable, that's good with us. If you have to join by phone for any reason, this is what the phone interface looks like. If you want to mute or unmute, lower left-hand corner, you see that microphone icon. Just click on that, and that's how you mute or unmute via a phone. And if you want to chat, lower right-hand corner, those 3 dots, see them right there? Click on that. The chat interface will pop up, and you click on chat, and you're chatting via your phone. Before we begin, some community agreements so that we are as inclusive and respectful and participatory as possible. Number 1, we do like to have as much interaction as possible. A lot of it will happen through the chat box. Every once in a while, we like to call on people to get their opinion. If you would rather not be called on, if that's not your learning style, just let us know in the chat box. Just say, please don't call on me, and we won't. We recognize that the ability to multitask, to be distracted, is huge when you're on Zoom or really any video conferencing format. So we encourage you to stay strong, avoid temptation. This is a 2-hour webinar, but there is a break in the middle. So if you're thinking, I need to check my email or answer the call of nature or whatever, there will be a break around 1 p.m. Eastern. And if there's anything you'd like to add to the community agreements to make sure that this is an inclusive, respectful experience for all concerned, go ahead and put that in the chat box now, and we'll see if we need anything we want to add. And those of you who are asking not to be called on, we acknowledge that, so not a problem. One more thing before we get going. As Mayor said, we do offer after class time. So if you don't have to rush off at 2 p.m., no worries. You can stay online, and if there's a question you want to have answered that we didn't get to, any other comments or any other business, Kirsten and I will be staying around after 2 Eastern to answer questions, and we'll stick around for at least another 10 or 15 minutes. So please know that option is available to you. Okay, so with that, let me set the agenda for today's session. We're going to do 4 things today. Number one, I want to provide a little context about how we got here to this world where we're stuck in now, where everything is via video conference, but also what the Goodman Center has been doing over the last really 20 years to really prepare for today. We're going to define some terms for you. All virtual sessions are not the same. When we did the research that Mayor referred to earlier to learn more about video conferences, one of the first things we found out from people was they said, well, the rules, the things that make it a good experience or a bad experience are different depending on the kind of gathering you're having online. So we're going to set some terms to define 3 different kinds of virtual sessions, and we'll be using that lingo the rest of the way. Then we'll get into the guts of this research that we did over the summer, and from that came 9 major takeaways that we're going to share with you, and each of these takeaways comes with recommendations about what you can do to have more engaging, more productive, more successful virtual sessions. And we'll save some time at the end for some other resources. Besides the slides you're going to get today, the copy of the report we did, we're going to point you to some other places that can help you have better virtual sessions. So that'll be coming as well, okay? So that's our agenda. And once again, about halfway through, we'll take we'll have a break for about 10 minutes, okay? So let's dive in. Let's talk about a little context, how we got here to this place today. Well, we've actually been down this road before. If you remember back to 2008, when we had the Great Recession, for the and so many people were looking for ways to cut costs and save money. That's when we saw the first major uptick in video conferencing, particularly in the nonprofit world. So at that time, seeing that, as the Goodman Center, seeing that, we decided to do some research. And we did a report called Dialing In, Logging On, Nodding Off, the true costs of teleconferences, video conferences, and webinars, to see what was working and what wasn't, to identify problems and trends. So our study of this video conferencing world goes back to 2008. That's when we really started to track it. In 2009, we started to teach people best practices in the webinar on webinars. And we've been teaching that for now 11 years. And as we go, we've been learning about new technologies and new best practices from the participants in our classes. And as Mayor said, back in June, we did one for some of you. Some of you may remember that. So we've logged hundreds of hours teaching online, learning from students, and constantly updating best practices for good virtual sessions. And then in March of last year, as you remember, everything changed. And suddenly, everyone's staying home. No one's going into the office anymore. And now everything we are doing starts to look like this. So by the summer, we decided if everyone's doing this, what better time to update that research that we originally did in 2008 and to again ask people what works and what doesn't? What are the best practices? So we developed a survey, some of you may have even taken it, asking many, many questions about all the different things we do online. But one thing we learned right away is, anybody can create a survey and put it up on the web. You got to get people to take it, right? So we partnered with all of these organizations and including, by the way, the Hartford Foundation, and said, please push this out to your members, your affiliates, your grantees, and create more awareness for the survey. And thanks to this partnership, these partnerships and others, 4,405 people took the survey. Now, since these people self-selected, I can't say to you that this is a scientifically accurate survey, by the official research definition. But that's a lot of people talking. And so our feeling is that, ignore the audience at your own peril. So based on their responses, we created this report called Unmuted, a copy of which will be made available to you today through NSP. But what we're going to do today is we're going to review sort of the top lines of the report. And by the way, if you're wondering, are we represented in this report? This is a breakdown of who took the survey. So if you are a nonprofit, you are the biggest contributor to this report. Now, as far as defining terms, like I said, all virtual sessions are not the same. When we went to talk to people, they said, well, it depends what kind of session you're talking about. So we ended up dividing virtual sessions into 3 categories. One category is the webinar, basically what we're doing now. And we define a webinar as a virtual session that's mostly about information sharing, teaching, or training. It usually is mostly a one-way delivery, a one-way push of information, usually featuring a speaker or a group of speakers, usually featuring slides like you're seeing here, with interaction, but tends to be more limited. Then there's the web meeting, and you're all familiar with these. These are your staff meetings, your division meetings, your board meetings. This is when what's up on the screen usually is just a bunch of faces so people can see each other and talk. Web meetings are mostly about discussion or decision making. They are highly interactive. They may or may not include slides. And they also tend to be smaller because if you're going to have interaction, you can't have 1,000 people, but you can have 5, 10, 15, 20, etc. And then for your really big meetings, that's what we call a webcast. That's when you've got 100 or 1,000 people. That's your organization-wide meeting. These also tend to be more of a one-way push of information featuring a speaker or a panel. Interaction tends to be more limited because of the size of the group. It's more constricted. So that's your webcast. So when we did our survey and we asked people questions, we asked them to answer for each of these categories. Do the rules change for these categories? Now, some people may be saying, well, what about the multi-day web conference or the 3-day training? Where does that fit in here? Well, we think that's basically parts of all 3. If you go to a multi-day conference, what used to be the keynote for the entire audience, that's your webcast. What used to be concurrent sessions where people would break out in rooms and see presentations, those would be your webinars. And what used to be smaller team meetings, off to the side somewhere, those would be your web meetings. So we think if you're attending web conferences or multi-day events, it's these 3 things, in various combinations. So those are the terms we're going to use going forward. So let's get to the guts of this report, Unmuted, and the 9 takeaways. We're going to go through each one. I'm going to let you read the actual takeaway that we printed in the report, and then we'll talk about it. And if you had a chance to do that survey, that short version of the survey that we sent out prior to today, you can compare your answers to the report. And I'm going to ask you at some times to actually go to the chat box and tell us, what did you put there? Okay? So get ready to do some typing. All right, takeaway number 1 is about engagement and participation. Please take a moment to read that for yourselves. This really is the overarching challenge. And you know this as well as I do. In this world of video conferencing, the ability for people working at home to be distracted, to want to multitask, to not be paying full attention, it's a huge challenge. So every web meeting that you have of any kind, I think is like a minute-by-minute challenge to keep people focused and engaged. We asked this question on the survey: what makes a work-related video conference a positive experience for you? What makes it a positive experience for you? Take a moment now. Whether you had a chance to do this in advance or right now, please put in the chat box. What's your number one response? What makes it a positive experience for you? I'll give you a second to type your answer in the chat box. Go ahead. Okay, seeing lots of good responses here. Yeah, and one of the words I'm seeing again and again is engaging, interactive. Very good. The word engaging, I think, is coming up the most. In our survey, what makes an online convening a positive experience? Engaging presentation, engaging facilitation, number one answer. And conversely, when we asked what makes an online convening a negative experience, well, technical problems carried the day there. But look, lack of engagement, just the opposite, was the second most popular answer. So clearly, people are telling us, I want to be engaged. I really do want to be part of the experience. But look at this next survey question. How often do you find yourself multitasking during web meetings, webinars, webcasts? And look at how many people fell in the frequently to always range. Respondents were saying, yes, I am multitasking frequently or always, almost at least half the time, no matter what kind of gathering it is. So while people want to be engaged, there's a lot of multitasking going on. So there are things that we need to do. We need to actively work to keep people engaged and interacting. So here are some tips. First of all, give them something to do right from the start. In our webinars, the Goodman Center, we'll put slides on the screen called Points to Ponder while we wait for everyone to log on. So the people who show up on time have something to read, something to think about as a reward for showing up on time. Because if you don't do this, if you tell the people who show up on time, hey, thanks for showing up on time, we appreciate it, but we're still missing a few people, so hang in there, folks. Then really the first message you've given them is, let the multitasking begin, right? There's nothing else for them to do. Go check your email. So give them something to do right from the start, whether it's reading some slides, answering a question, doing some back and forth, anything to keep them active. Set the tone right from the beginning. We're going to use every minute that you give us productively. Once you get underway, look for ways to ask questions. Don't just present information. You may have very good information, but if you can turn it around into a question, it gives them a chance to participate. Now, what you're seeing on the screen now is a slide from one of our webinars in the past about design principles for communications. This slide is about designing web pages to put stuff where people are looking. Because according to actual heat mapping studies where they track people's eyes as they look at a page, they discovered that when people see a web page for the first time, page they've never seen before, they tend to scan the page in this F-shaped pattern. Okay, so that's what that slide's all about. Well, if you design web pages, that's useful information, but it's just sort of given to you. Here it is, look at it, take it in, go do better next time, right? But what if instead, when they got to this part of the webinar, it was presented like this, as a pop quiz? According to eye tracking studies, your eyes are most likely to follow which pattern? And then we call on somebody and have them do some critical thinking on the spot, pick one and explain why they picked it. And meanwhile, everyone else in the webinar is doing the same thing. They're trying to figure it out too. Here's another example from a webinar on managing versus leading. Now, on the left, 5 bullet points, that's managing, okay? That's good. On the right, 5 bullets, that's leading. That's even better. But once again, the distinction is just given to you. Here it is, take it in, learn from it, and do better next time. But what if instead they had taken these 10 bullets and presented it like this? Now they can call on people and say, okay, item 1, keeps things running smoothly. Is that managing or leading? Item 2, et cetera, et cetera. 10 chances to call on people in the audience and have them do some critical thinking on the spot. You can conduct polls to give people a chance to see how their answers compare to everybody else. The polling mechanism in Zoom is very easy to use. Let me blow that up for you. You can set up polls in advance and then just launch them, or you can create polls on the spot. Very easy to use. Breakout rooms are another great way to promote interaction. Sometimes with larger groups, people are reluctant to speak up in front of a whole bunch of people. But you put them in a room with 4 or 5 people, and all of a sudden they're a little more comfortable and they start to speak, and that loosens them up for the rest of the gathering. And by the way, breakout rooms, you don't have to have 5 or 6 or a minimum number of people in a room. You know how in a live presentation, sometimes you'll say to everyone, pair up with someone at your table, just 2 people, and pair and share. Well, you can do that with breakout rooms. This group of fiscal management associates did this where they took a large group, they created many, many rooms with 2 each, and they said 2 people, 2 questions, and do a quick pair and share. So you can do it with as few as 2 people in a room. If you have not used breakout rooms, if you're not sure you know how to do it, hey, just go on Zoom. There are great tutorials on Zoom itself that will teach you how to create and use breakout rooms. Now, here's something from the survey we didn't expect to learn. It's kind of surprised us. When we asked people, of all the tools that promote engagement and interaction, what would you say is most effective? Do you know what the #1 answer was? Creative use of the chat box. That was the #1 answer. People said, that's how I get the most engagement, creative use of the chat box. So what do we mean by that? Well, how do most people use the chat box? Ask questions, make comments, right? Pretty straightforward. But you can also use the chat box to share links to documents that people need to have, or websites you want them to visit, or videos you want them to look at. So that's a way that they can just get a link real fast. You can conduct snap surveys where instead of setting up a poll, if the question is, yes, no, true, false, guess a number, you can do that in the chat box. You can have chat storms, or what some people call waterfalls. The way this works is you ask a question such as, and don't do this, by the way, this is just an example. Which organization puts on the best webinars? Which organization? And then you tell people, I want you to put your answer in the chat box, but don't hit enter until I tell you. And then you say, okay, has everyone put their answer in the chat box? Okay, 3, 2, 1, everyone hit enter now. And all of a sudden you see this cascade of answers in the chat box, and it has kind of that waterfall effect of answer after answer. It's kind of similar in spirit to doing a word cloud. Sometimes people will put footnotes or citations on their slides, their PowerPoint slides, and it'll be very fine print at the bottom that no one can read, and it just creates visual noise on the slide. But if it's important that people have the citations, then put those in the chat box. And here's my favorite use, using the chat box to read the room. One of the most common laments in the research we did over the summer was people said, I can't read the room. I'm not with everybody. I'm not seeing them. Sometimes their videos are off. So I can't tell if they're with me or not, if they're understanding what I'm saying. It's not like being in a room where you can see people and you can pick up the energy. So you can use the chat box to explicitly ask those questions that you're wondering in here. Are you with me? Was that clear? Is anybody confused? And it's a little bit explicit and arch, but hey, this is the world we're in. So use the chat box to help you read the room. In an online meeting, a virtual session, not everything has to happen online. You can mix offline and online activities to break it up, make it interesting. When we do our storytelling webinars, we have a 3-hour version where, we're online together for 3 hours. But in the course of those 3 hours, there'll be activities where we tell them, take this template, like you see on the screen now, this story structure worksheet, take 20 minutes to fill it out. We've sent this to them in advance. And we tell them, leave your computer on, leave the connection going, but go find a comfortable spot. If it's nice, go outside, get some fresh air. We'll wait 20 minutes, then come back and we'll resume there. So mixing offline and online activities. And you want to stop and take questions frequently and call on people. Sometimes people will just save Q&A till the end, but I think that if you put a question in the chat box and you're waiting 20 or 30 minutes for an answer, it's frustrating and you might even think that nobody even saw it. So we urge people, stop at regular intervals or after every major section and take some questions. Now, one of the things we asked in the survey was, when it comes to asking questions, do you have a preference? Do you prefer to ask questions out loud and speak to the speaker, or do you actually prefer submitting via chat? Take a moment now in the chat box and share your response. Which do you prefer, out loud or chat box? Go ahead and just write those words. I see, Lindsay, there's a vote for out loud, a couple of votes for chat. Yeah, actually, I'm going back and forth, back and forth. A lot of people are preferring the chat box. I want to show you something we learned from the survey. The answers often depend on the format you're in. How often do you prefer asking questions out loud as opposed to entering the chat box? In web meetings, which tend to be smaller, more interactive, 50% said frequently or always, I'd rather speak, which is a small group, I want to speak up. But in larger webinars, you had, 51% saying, no, I'd prefer to do it in the chat box. So when it comes to taking questions, be aware of the kind of gathering you're having. People's preferences may change. So to close out this topic of engagement and participation, we asked you on the survey, whether you are leading or participating, what are creative ways that you've seen video conferences keep participants engaged? If you have a really creative way to promote engagement, would you please share your response in the chat box now? We always love to add to this category. So let's see what we have here. We've mentioned polls. Yvette, thank you for underlining that for us. Whiteboards. Yeah, I don't have a lot of experience with whiteboards, but I know a lot of people like to use those. That's a good technique. Anything else? Screen sharing. Thank you, Tracy. Activities, breakout rooms on specific subjects. Good. This is some of the stuff that we've covered, so glad to see other people are doing that as well. Anything that we haven't covered? Any techniques? Funny videos or music. Very nice. Yep, all good. All good. Animals, pets. Not quite sure what we mean by that, but I'm all for animals and pets. All right, we're about a half an hour in, so I just want to stop here and see, are there any questions or comments? And Kirsten, let me ask you, did any questions or comments slide by me in the chat box here that you saw? And if not, if you have a question or comment now, you can put the letter Q or C in the chat box, and we'll call on you and ask you to speak up and ask your question. Kirsten, did I miss anything?
Not so far.
Okay,
There's
good.
been some great comments and interaction. No questions yet.
Very good. So anybody have a question at this point before we move on to our next takeaway? All right, well, not seeing any. Let's move on to takeaway number 2, which is about inclusivity. Take a moment to read this for yourselves. This was a little bit surprising to us. The numbers here were surprisingly low when it came to the techniques people were using to create a more inclusive space online. We asked this question in the survey. How often have you seen convening leaders or facilitators say or do things specifically to create an inclusive space that acknowledges and adjusts for the diversity of all participants? You would think that that should be a frequently or always thing, right? That should just be a given, that we should be all doing that. But look at this. 43% said it was a sometimes thing, and 39% said it was a rarely or never thing. Only 19% said frequently or always on this category. And it's not that hard to do. First of all, you can start by giving people a chance to check in. You know, it's the moral equivalent of standing at the door when people walk into the meeting room and saying, hi, how are you? What's going on, etc. You can do that online by asking people to introduce themselves, maybe answer a question. How are you feeling or thinking about work at this moment? You can also start, as we did today, with agreements. This is how we're going to proceed here. Here are the rules of engagement for this particular gathering. Make sure people are clear so they know Do you want me to speak up? Is it just a chat box? Videos on or off, etc. Let me ask you, whether you are leading or participating, what have you seen or done to create a more inclusive space? We're always looking for interesting techniques here. If you can take a moment to put that in the chat box, any suggestions, any recommendations on things you have seen or done that create a more inclusive space right from the start. I'll give you a second to think about it. Ellen says, change your name to include your org or your business. Catherine says, pronouns in names. I'm seeing more of that. Thank you for that, Catherine. Lori says, ask people that if they are talkers to leave room for quieter people. That's a nice community agreement up front. Some of these things like closed captioning, ASL, et cetera, are actually going to get into the next thing I want to talk about, which is accessibility, which is to me sort of a subset of inclusivity. We asked this question: how often have you seen convening leaders or facilitators create greater accessibility for the content? Things like closed captioning, language translation. Here, what we're talking about with accessibility, and the way I'm distinguishing it from inclusivity, is that we're talking specifically about those things that allow people to see better, hear better, or understand better. I realize that that is a subset of inclusivity, but I'm talking specifically about just the raw ability to see it, hear it, understand it. Again, I think this should be a frequently or always thing for everybody, but it was frequently or always 12% of the time at best for the various categories of gatherings that we're seeing online. So how can we do better on the accessibility front? Well, first of all, know your platform's tools, whether we're using like Zoom today or Microsoft Teams, Google Meet, Adobe Connect. If you aren't aware, just go to your platform's homepage and look at what tools they have available to you. Usually there is a whole suite of tools depending on your level of service. Look at Zoom, for example. If you go to Zoom, like we're using now, this section right here under settings, you can, and one person mentioned this in the chat box, set it up so that when you send out the recording of your meeting, what have you, it comes with a transcript. For example, it looks like this. While the meeting is, while people are seeing slides on the left, they'll see an audio transcript on the right. Now, I have heard from some people that the AI in Zoom is just okay at times, and sometimes the transcripts aren't that accurate. They're better than nothing. You can also set up closed captioning in Zoom. Not that hard to do. You just turn on that option, assuming it's available to you. Again, check your level of service. And then once you're underway, you'll see a closed caption option on the bottom of your screen in all those tools. If you click on that, then a box will appear where you have to assign someone to type. Basically, you're doing it yourself, whether it's you, the host, or your co-host or whatever. You need someone who can type quickly because you assign someone to type, they do the transcription of what's being said, and then a separate box pops up on the screen so people can see a live transcript. Back in September, I attended a conference by the Communications Network where they really made an effort to make it as accessible as possible. This was a screen grab from one of the sessions, and you can see, first of all, they had a whole separate Zoom window for sign language interpreters. So they were providing that service. And then on the lower right there, they had what's called CART, Computer Assisted Real-Time Transcription. This is where they hired a separate service to do that closed captioning, the right there. And each person in the audience could choose the font size and style that was most readable for them. Another thing that can help you with accessibility, and this may be the one tip that you'll shake your head and go, wow, I didn't even know that existed, is PowerPoint. Depending on the level of operating system you have and also which PowerPoint you have, which version, if you have the right operating system in the most recent version of PowerPoint, you can be presenting slides like we are doing right now and have them have the slides with subtitles or even language translation. Let me show you what I mean. I set up this presentation today. As I was setting up, I clicked on slideshow and a menu appeared for subtitle settings. So I set it up so that at the press of a button, I can speak English and have what I'm saying translated live into Spanish as subtitles on your screen. There are some icons here on the lower left. I think you can see them as I move the cursor. I'm going to click on this icon right here. And now you should see a black bar along the bottom of your screen and live translation into Spanish. Now, I'm not a fluent Spanish speaker, so I'm not sure how good a translation this is, but those who are have told me it's not bad. You can do this for 70 languages, or you could just do it English to English and have your own subtitles. PowerPoint will do that for you. I agree, very cool. All right, takeaway number 3 is about being a leader or facilitator. Take a moment to read this. Again, in our research, we asked people, you're leading webinars, have you had training? What are some of the things that you do, et cetera, strictly for people who are leading. How would you describe the training that you've had to lead or facilitate online convenings of any kind? Look what we found here. From a 35%, roughly a third, to almost half, 48%, said, I have had no training. I'm doing it, but no training to do it. Now, back last March, a year ago, when we were all thrust in this situation, it's understandable to have no training. But when we did this survey in July and August, after several months of this, you would think some people would have had some training at this. You know, we're stuck doing this now. But I was kind of surprised at how little training there was. People just sort of thrust in this situation. And that, I think, led to some of our other results about what was happening online. We asked people, how often did the online convenings leader provide sufficient instructions at the beginning on how to use the video conferencing platform's various tools? So at the beginning of the webinar, did they tell you, here's how you mute and unmute, ask questions, have your camera on or off? Again, you would think that this would be an everyday thing, a frequently or always thing. That this is just automatic, right? 57 to 71% were providing instructions sometimes or less often. They're just assuming that everyone knows what to do. We did some qualitative research, and we asked meeting leaders, what makes it challenging for you to lead a successful online convening? On the left there, you see 7 different things that people told us, 7 different things. But then we asked them to rate them on 1 to 5 for how challenging are these different things, from 1 being not too challenging to 5 being extremely challenging. And you can see here that paying attention to several simultaneous streams of information while you're leading was almost number 1 across the board. This is what people said. This is what makes it hard. I'm trying to present, watch the chat box, dealing with technical issues. Maybe I have a Google Doc open. Maybe I've got some other application going, and I got to track all of it. So based on these findings I've just shared, some recommendations about leading and facilitating. Number 1, if you haven't had any training, get some. So even what we're doing today falls in that category. But there are plenty of tutorials on the websites of the various platforms to make sure that you know how to use all the tools to the fullest. If you don't have to, don't go it alone. It's really hard to do this by yourself. Today I've got a whole team behind me. Kirsten is watching the chat box. The folks from Hartford Foundation are dealing with any technical issues. So we've got a whole team of people allowing me just to focus on the material. Our friends at Casey Family Programs, one of our clients, you see their worksheet there. They have 5-person teams behind their webinars. But I think if you can have at least 2 people, 1 to handle the presentation and the second person to handle everything else, that'll do. Of course, sometimes you don't have a choice. You just have to fly solo. But if that's the case, let your audience know exactly what you're going to be doing because you are flying solo. Last week, I had a chance to interview Tony DeSantis. He works at the Pennsylvania Department of Conservation and Natural Resources. He does these webinars all the time. he's one of their best people. So I interviewed him to find out what his tips and tricks were. Listen to what Tony says about having to do it by yourself.
I learned how to do these by myself, and now I'm in that comfort zone where it's just easier for me to do them myself.
Okay.
So if people have questions, I can't see them pop up on a screen.
Okay.
So what I've done is I explain that to people. It's like, there's a Q&A feature available. Ask all the questions you like. However, I can't see them. So what we'll do is in the middle, we'll take a break. I'll put up a slide saying Q&A check-in, and I'll catch everybody up with questions. And at the end, we'll have a Q&A session. Give me all your questions, your feedback. We'll have a powwow. I'll stay here as long as the questions are coming in.
So just let your audience know exactly how it's going to proceed because you're flying solo. And unless you're dealing with a group of people whom you know, who are meeting on a regular basis, and you know they're all proficient in the platform, if you're dealing with a group where you don't know, you might be cycling in new people you've never met before, then take a few minutes at the top just to cover the basics as we did today, so people know how to mute, unmute, chat, video on, off, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Lastly, under basics, you are now the star of your own TV show. When you're on Zoom, you're on camera. So just make sure you don't make some of the basic mistakes. I've sat through many, many webinars where the host or the facilitator has more light behind them or off to the side than on their face. And so even if they're squared up nicely on their screen, they're sitting there in darkness. Sometimes people don't bother to frame themselves correctly, and you end up looking at half their face or their forehead or, what have you. Beware the unflattering angle. I was in a webinar recently where the host did it from his living room, put the laptop on the coffee table in front of the couch where he was sitting, which means that the laptop was looking up at him, and we were basically looking up his nose for 30 minutes. Not the best look. And also, you want to make eye contact with your audience, and you do that by looking at the camera. For me, that's a little green dot on the top of my computer. But if I wanted to look at you, right now, you're over on this side of my screen. So here I am looking right in Kirsten's face here, but she's saying, where is he looking? He's not looking at me, right? Exactly. Now, some people say, God, it's hard. It's hard to focus on the camera. Here's a little trick that I've tried. I take a picture of my wife or my kids or my little dog Bruno, and I'll put that, I'll literally tape that to the top of my computer so I can be looking at somebody or something and talk to them like I'm talking to a person, and that reminds me that that's where they are, not over there. So lighting, framing, background, eye contact, a very simple checklist to make sure that you come across professionally. And even if you're that little box in the upper right-hand corner on the side of the screen, it makes a difference. I said that was the last thing, but I'm going to say one more thing about facilitating and being a professional in this setup, and that has to do with your voice. And here's a lesson that I learned from my previous career. I worked in radio for many years, and I learned something about what happens when your voice comes over the radio or basically through a microphone, which is what we're in now. You're coming through either a computer microphone or even worse, the telephone. You've got to overcome that situation. Now, you probably heard it said that when you go on television, it adds 10 pounds. Have you ever heard that? Right? You got to be really skinny, apparently, to go on TV because it's going to make you look wider for some reason. So with TV, that's an addition problem. Well, if you go on the radio, you have a subtraction problem. When you go on the radio and your voice goes through a microphone, you lose 10 to 20% of the clarity, the meaning of what you're saying, because two things are happening. One of them is technical. When you are speaking through a microphone, there's something called compression, which means that you're losing the high end and the lower end of your voice, and you're tending to get more of the middle range, which will make you sound more monotonal and less interesting. So you've got that. And secondly, when people can't see you at all or see you clearly, then they can't see the facial cues that can tell you what you really mean because your eyebrows are raised or you're smirking or whatever. So because of compression and lack of facial cues, your voice will not come across the same way as if you were in a room talking to people in person. It's that there's a flattening effect. You lose some of the meaning. So here's the point. If your voice is going to be the dominant voice for any length of time, you have to put more into your delivery just to sound normal than when you're normally in a room with people. Everyone, take a moment to read this for yourselves. And I'm going to call on someone to help me now in a little demonstration. And let's see, Monica from Hartford Foundation. Monica, would you help me with this part? Can you unmute and speak up? Is Monica there?
I am. Sorry, I dropped my microphone fell out of my ear.
So Monica, take a moment to read that paragraph for yourself like everyone else, to yourself.
Mm-hmm.
So let's do a little demonstration here. What I want you to do, Monica, is I'm going to turn the webinar over to you now. Okay, you're in charge.
Great.
You're going to teach this to the audience. Let's pretend that it's not on the screen, that they can't read it for themselves. This is your script. They haven't seen it.
Okay.
I want you to take a deep breath and read this aloud in your normal speaking voice. Okay, just read it aloud, normal speaking voice. Don't do anything special, and then we'll try something different. So whenever you're ready, let's hear Monica take one.
In radio, they teach announcers to really emphasize or punch keywords because the audience doesn't have visual cues to help them understand, and because the higher and lower ends of the audio may be lost in the transmission. The telephone can be even worse. So what may feel like overemphasizing to you will actually sound normal to the listeners.
Okay, very good. That was exactly the level of mediocrity I was hoping for. No, I'm just teasing, sort of. But here's the problem, Monica.
Mm-hmm.
I can see you, but I'm not getting the visual cues as well. And we are losing some of the high and the low end. So it does have a little bit of a dulling effect on your delivery. So here's what I want you to do. I want you to do it again, but this time I want you to do what the text is telling you to do. I want you to punch keywords. I want you to overemphasize, to basically overact by like 10 or 20%, okay? To the point where it might feel a little silly to you, but I think it's going to sound better to everyone who's with us today. And for everyone who's joined, here's your job. What you just heard was take one, right? Monica, take one. What you're about to hear is going to be take two. And after she finishes take two, I want you to write in the chat box, which Monica would you rather listen to for an entire webinar, take one or take two, okay? So that's your job. So Monica, with energy and urgency and excitement and overemphasizing, take a deep breath. Let's hear take two.
In radio, they teach announcers to really emphasize or punch keywords because the audience doesn't have visual cues to help them understand, and because the higher and lower ends of the audio may be lost in the transmission. The telephone can be even worse. So what may feel like overemphasizing to you will actually sound normal to the listeners.
Okay, listeners, take one or take two. Which one would you rather hear? It's take two. It's a sweep here, and I'm not surprised. Monica, I have to ask you, did that feel a little weird to you? Feel a little silly?
Oh yeah.
Yeah, but here's the thing.
You have no idea.
Yeah, but here's the thing. There is a performative aspect when you speak on the radio or through a microphone in a webinar. You have to take it up a notch just to sound like yourself in person. You have to, otherwise you're gonna have this dulling effect. So be aware of that. And one way to achieve that, by the way, if you can, this is another technique I learned from my radio days. If you can do your webinars, your meetings standing up, your voice will reflect your posture. If you're standing, gesticulating, projecting to the other side of the room versus hunched over your laptop at your desk, your voice will reflect that difference. Someone in the chat box I saw made also a note about equipment. If you do this a lot, if you're going to, and we're all doing a lot these days, you might want to invest in slightly better equipment that will make you look and sound more professional. What you're seeing now is actually a picture of my webinar workstation where I am right now. And I've done some things to upgrade it a little bit to try and help me be as professional as possible. So number one, I got what you call a Veridesk, where you can put something on a regular desk and it can lift, and you can have a standing desk when you want to, and it can go down and you can be sitting when you want to. $295, Amazon.com. You can also see that I got a broadcast quality microphone. Not that expensive, $100 for the mic. It has to go through a preamp to go into my computer, so $130 for that. But much better sound than if I just was going through my computer. And because there's not a lot of lighting where I'm sitting, I got one of these things called a Lume Cube, which you can just suction right onto the top of your computer, take it wherever you go, and make sure that you have proper lighting. All right, let's do one more takeaway before we take a break. And that's about structure. Please take a moment to read this for yourselves. This was something that came out loud and clear through the survey. People said, you know, I'm working at home. My professional life is bleeding into my personal life. You know, every day is a challenge. So if I'm going to turn over some of my time to you for a virtual meeting, I want structure. I want to know that you've taken the time to make sure that every minute is going to be used constructively, thoughtfully. The word agenda came up more than any other on the survey around this section. How often did the online convening leader or facilitator provide an agenda, either like a document in advance or something on the screen, that gave participants a clear outline of content? I would think this should be a frequently or always thing, right? We're going to let you know exactly what we're going to do in this hour, these 2 hours. Sometimes or less often, 44 to 54% of the time. That's a pretty significant percentage of people who are just saying, let's get together. I'm not going to tell you what we're going to do, but we're going to do it, right? Now, the agendas that you put on screen during a meeting, during a webinar, doesn't have to be that fancy. It can be something as simple as this. You know, here are the 5 items that we're going to cover in order. Or if you're doing a teaching session, a workshop, you can say, here are our learning objectives. But I'll tell you what I'm actually most partial to. Agendas that track progress. Here's one from a group called Get to College. Now, if you were to join this webinar midstream and this slide were to come up on the screen, this agenda slide, you would know right away that, okay, they've covered the first 3 sections. They're in sections 4 and 5, and there are 4 more sections to go. And you would also know from those 3 bars on the left side of the slide that we're in the middle of a 3-part something, right? So as the webinar continues, this slide will constantly reappear and update to let you know where you've been, where you are, and where you're going. Another way you can give people a good sense of structure is through the overall design of the entire slide presentation, assuming you're using slides. Here's one from a group called the Trauma and Learning Policy Initiative. This was a presentation that had, as you can see, 5 sections, but they're color-coded. Let me show you the entire presentation in slide sorter mode. See it? Now, the audience knows that when the background is green, they're in section 1. When it changes to blue, they're in a new section, orange, another section. The colors are not random. It's all reinforcing structure as you go. Okay, we've been going for nearly an hour now, so let's do this. Let's take a short break. And here's how it works. I'm going to put this up on the screen, and there's a timer clock in the upper left-hand corner. We're going to take a 10-minute break. When that timer clock hits 0, make sure you're back because we're going to start promptly when it hits 0. So if you leave your desk or go anywhere else, and we urge you, do get up, get away from the computer, stretch your legs, get some fresh air, answer the call of nature, but be back here in 10 minutes. We'll pick it up then. Enjoy your break. And the clock starts now. It's up. Time is up. By the way, here's another tip for you. If you have a meeting that has a break in it, create a slide like this so that when people leave or come back, there's something on the screen to tell them exactly what's happening. Too often I see people will just stop dead in the middle of a presentation and the only thing on screen will be like the last slide, so that anybody rejoining or joining late will think that the meeting is frozen, that there's no audio or whatever. So create a break slide. And if you want to have a timer clock, you're wondering, hey, where did they get that cool 10-minute clock? You know what? Just go to YouTube and search countdown timer, and you can download 5, 10, 15, 20-minute timers. It's just a white timer clock on a black background that if you put on your screen, just like we did here, looks like you got a timer clock on your screen. Isn't that cool? All right, let's get back to where we were. Takeaway number 5 about length and frequency. How long? How often? Take a moment to read this for yourselves. We were really curious. How long can people do this for and still be productive? So we asked a bunch of questions in our survey, and you saw them on that mini version we gave. But I'm curious to answer this question. How many hours per week on average are you spending in video conferences now? Take a moment, put the number or the range in your chat box. How many hours per week? Ellen says 25 to 30. Oh, Mary's lucky. She's only 4 to 8. 25. 10 to 20. Okay, I'm seeing quite a range here, from as low as 4 to 5, 2 to as high as 20. Yep. Well, as we say on Family Feud, survey said, over the course of a typical week, 4,405 respondents. What's the total number of hours you're spending in a work-related web-based convening? Almost 60% were somewhere in the 6 to 20 hour range, which I think that looks like where most of you fell as well. So we're spending a lot of time in this virtual environment. But here's a question we asked. This is one of the ones I was most interested in. Look at this question. This was an agree or disagree. If a web-based convening has a skilled facilitator, offers activities that successfully engage participants, and includes regular and substantial breaks, in other words, best case scenario, I can remain focused and productive for any length of time up to and including 8 hours. So we asked people, agree or disagree. If it's really run well, if they're really paying attention to all of the tools, can you do it for 8 hours? And look, there was a pretty interesting split here. 54% strongly agreed or agreed. So yeah, good facilitation, engagement, breaks, I can do it all day. But 46% said, no, I don't care how good it is, I cannot do this all day, sorry. So that we thought, okay, 46%, it's a pretty substantial percentage of people saying, please don't make me do this all day. So we wanted to drill down on that. So we asked a follow-up question. We said, if you disagreed or strongly disagreed, what is the total number of hours you can participate and still feel focused and productive? So how much? And look, 87% said 2 to 4 hours a day max. That's about as much as I can give you. This is directly related to this phenomenon of Zoom fatigue, people just feeling worn out having to do this. And we're seeing a lot of this lately, a lot of reaction to this. There was an article in the New York Times just last week with the headline, tired of Zoom calls? So is Citigroup's chief executive. Look what they did. They now have Fridays are Zoom-free Fridays. They're telling their employees once a week, at Citigroup, we're not going to ask you to participate in any Zoom calls. You got stuff of your own, that's your business, but we're not going to make you do it. So they're cutting by 20% the number of Zoom calls that they're having because of this fatigue factor. So we really wanted to drill down on this, and we asked a number of questions. What amount of time do you feel would be the ideal length for a web meeting, webinar, webcast? Now, obviously, there are extenuating circumstances. Sometimes you got to meet for 2 hours. Sometimes it can be done in 10 minutes. But in general, optimal length, well, people were pretty consistent. About an hour. That's about how long I can go for any of these different kinds of virtual sessions. We also asked people, how long can you go without a break? Where do you need to take a break? Here, there was more of a range. Some people said, every 30 minutes, please. Let me get up and stretch, etc. Some people said, I can go as long as 90 minutes, but generally in that range. So some recommendations based on these results. Number one, we recommend that if you're in charge and you can control the number of hours per day your team is spending online, don't ask for more than 4 hours. Because remember, you've got that 46% out there for whom that's the maximum. That's what, those who can do more, great for them, but why push the people who can't? Generally, if you can limit any type of convening to 1 hour, that's great. No longer. If you have to go longer, build in breaks. And we recommend breaks generally every 30 to 45 minutes. Definitely no more than 90 minutes without a break. Just want to stop there again to see if there are any general questions or comments about anything we've covered so far today. If you have a question or a comment, you can just put the letter Q or C in the chat box if you want us to call on you, so you can ask the question out loud, or you can type the question now. But I do want to give you a second. Anything we've talked about. Sarah Hill says, if you have a 90-minute meeting, should you give a break? If so, how long? Yes, Sarah, I would say I would break it at 30 to 45 minutes, break it in half. And minimum breaks should be 5 to 10 minutes. Give people a chance to get up, stretch their legs, get some fresh air, etc., so they can really recharge and come back and be ready to concentrate. Lori Herrick asked, what about just letting people take breaks as needed? My only concern there, Lori, would be, are people walking away from the meeting on their own and deciding that they're taking a break, but the meeting's, continuing? Or are you saying the meeting is small enough that you can do a group consensus? Should we take a break now? If you're saying group consensus, sure, fine. But letting people take breaks on their own, if they're going to miss stuff, I would be concerned about that. Other questions or comments about anything we've talked about so far? I'll give you another second to think about it. These are very good questions and comments, by the way.
Andy, we've had a couple questions earlier that fallen off the chat. Doretta had a question about a tip for people who wear glasses in terms of reflection from lights or ring lights. Do you have any advice about that? You're wearing glasses.
Yeah, and actually, I think there is a reflection off my glasses. You can see it. It doesn't bother me. I mean, I can see the light here, but I'm not sure if there's a way around that. I've heard that complaint. If anybody knows how to avoid that, ring lights may be a way. I think ring lights are famous for not doing that, but I'll throw that to the crowd here. If you know how to avoid lights reflecting off glasses, put it in the chat box. Anything else I missed?
We had a question from Maria about when you were talking about tracking the agenda of a meeting, if you thought that's effective for smaller web meetings with, say, just 10 or 12 people. I think that's a good tool for small meetings.
I do think it's a good tool for any meeting. I think that to let people know where you are, where you've been, et cetera, even with 10 or 12 people, it only takes a second to put a slide up there on the agenda to say, okay, we just checked off item 3, we're now on to item 4. I don't think it can hurt. It doesn't take a whole lot of time. Sarah Hill asks, what if it's only a once a month meeting? I'm fearful about wasting time. I think that if people are checking out on you, if they're wearing out, that's another way of wasting time. So I do think that even with once a month meetings, giving people a solid 5-minute break gives them a chance to recharge and come back. So I still am a fan of breaks in that regard. All right, let's move on. We'll stop again. Let's talk about preferred platforms. What platform do you use? What do you like? Take a moment to read this. Now, in some ways, this result was not surprising, but there was an aspect of it that was. We asked people in the survey to list the top 5, up to 5 platforms that they use on a regular basis. Because we've heard from some groups, we use Zoom internally, we use Microsoft Teams externally, or we use Adobe Connect for this, or we have to use WebEx for that. So we know that people are using multiple platforms. But look at these results. We asked people not only to list the platforms they use, but to rate them on a 1 to 5 scale, 1 being not very satisfied, 5 being extremely satisfied. And look at what we found. Whether we're talking about all convenings or just breaking it down to meetings, webinars, or webcasts, Zoom was not only used most often and by a large margin, it was also the most highly rated. People had a higher satisfaction level with Zoom than any other platform. So if people say, what do you recommend? If we're starting out or we're thinking of changing, what do we recommend? Generally, we recommend Zoom, but with a caveat. And the caveat is this: the technology of video conferencing is advancing and changing so quickly that new tools, new techniques are being discovered all the time, and any one might be a game changer as far as making that platform appropriate for you. And the example I would give you is what Microsoft has done with what they call Together Mode. In Microsoft Teams, if you're having a meeting, you can make it look like everyone's in one place, as opposed to 15 different TV shows on your screen. The reason I'm showing you this this shot from the NBA playoffs last summer is because that was actually a sneak preview for a lot of people of Teams. As you can see there, those video boards, it looks like people are in the stands in seats. That's what Microsoft Teams does. It can take a group of people, let's say 16 people in your meeting, and put them in what looks like an auditorium or a conference room. This has been actually proven scientifically to be less taxing on the brain. It's a lot easier for you to look at this screen and to see 16 people in one location than to watch 16 different videos on your screen, like in Zoom, in gallery mode, and feel like you're watching 16 different TV shows. So I'm not hyping Teams. I know a lot of people use it, and there's been some complaints. One of our commenters today said Teams is terrible. I've heard that. But all I'm saying is that, yes, generally we recommend Zoom, but keep checking out the platforms because they're all innovating all the time. And tomorrow, WebEx might be better for you. The next day, Google Meet might be the best. So try them all out and see what works best for you. That's my recommendation. Mike, I see you put a Q in the chat box. Mike, do you have a question? Do you want to open up your unmute and ask your question?
Yeah, I just had a question because I had heard that Microsoft Teams was terrible, but what is it specifically about it that makes it terrible, comparatively speaking, to Zoom or your other ones?
Let's see. Some of the complaints I've heard about Teams, I think that I think it has to do with people's videos, either where they show up on the screen or whether or not people can have their videos. Let me ask. Like Laura Horn says, Teams video isn't as clear. Sound is not good. Yes, we're seeing the chat box, Mike. Some people are answering you right there. So there's been a range of problems with Teams. So I'll let the chat box be your answer there. People have more experience than I.
Less control for the host.
Yeah.
Sports videos. Oh, okay.
Yep. So so you can see some right there. Thank you, wisdom of the crowd.
Gotcha.
All right, let's move on to takeaway number 7 about your personal videos. What we're just talking about in the chat box, your video feed. Take a moment to read this. We were very interested in the answer to this question because this might seem like a little thing, but your comfort level, your enjoyment, your engagement in a webinar may be very much affected by whether or not your video box is on or off, or others are on or off. So we asked this question in the survey. I want to ask you now. We asked people in general, do you prefer to have your camera on or off? In general, okay? I realize there are different circumstances. Chat box, on or off? What do you say? Mary's a vote for off. What do we have here? What else do we have here? We have some ons, off in big meetings. A lot of ons, off. Yep. Yeah, I'm seeing what we saw in the survey. It depends, or there's a pretty strong split. So take a look at our survey response. If you are able to join via video, how often do you prefer having your video stream on? Well, people said in smaller gatherings like meetings, 65%, yeah, on frequently or always. But in larger gatherings like webinars, 45% no, prefer to have it off. So please know that there's a pretty strong split here. Some people will tell you having it on helps me concentrate, like to see other people, makes me feel less isolated. But some people say having it off, don't have to worry how I'm dressed or what my room looks like. Don't feel like my privacy is being invaded. Don't feel like I'm on camera all day long. So here's what we recommend, kind of splitting the difference. Number one, when we start a meeting of any kind, we usually will tell people, come on in with your cameras on so we can say hello and chat with you informally, and you can introduce yourself and we can all see who's attending. It's a nice way to start off. You know, again, like the moral equivalent of greeting people as they walk into the meeting room. But once we get underway, then we think it can be more of a distraction. You know, people tend to stare at themselves, or you watch a cat walk across a keyboard and you stop paying attention to the slides. So we'll tell people once we get into the presentation, once we're into the slides, please turn them off for that period. But then if we stop down for questions or comments, you know, then turn them back on so we can see you as you ask your question or as we have a discussion. But all of that said, we always give participants the opportunity to choose for themselves. If you are more comfortable with it off, like I said at the very beginning today, you do you. You'd rather have it on, that's fine too. Your comfort level is, to me, the most important concern. When we asked this question in the survey, we got lots of short answers, yes, no, off, on, etc. One person said this: and for that person, I always say, the very least we can do is give them the choice. Isabel asks in the chat box, what about the presenter? In general, I think it is good for the presenter to be on the screen. I think it's an addition to help see the person speaking along with the slide. So yes, I'd say for the presenter, in general, they should have theirs on. All right, let's move on to takeaway number 8, the slides. If you have a slide-driven presentation like today, take a moment to read this. You know, whether you're presenting in person, in a room with real people, or online, you always want your slides to be as interesting, eye-catching, engaging as possible, right? You want people to stay focused on the screen. But that goes double, if not triple, for when you're online, like today. Because think about it. In a room, people see you at the front of the room, you're the living, breathing human being, and the screen might be very large, but you know, you're both up there with their attention. But in video like this, the screen, the slide is the dominant thing on your screen, and I'm just a little box off to the side, so that the slide has got to be doing all the work. And you're in an environment where the temptation to multitask, look away is huge. So you really have to think about the design of your slides. They have to be doing even more work online than they would be doing in room. So first of all, let's acknowledge that if your slides look something like this, let's not pretend that this is interesting to look at, okay? It's just not. It may be valuable information, it may be important stuff. It's not interesting to look at. So if these are your slides, well, what do? Well, one thing we recommend is to take the 2 sets of slides approach. What do we mean by that? Here's a presentation from a group called CES, the Centre for Effective Services, that's based in Ireland, in Belfast and Dublin. They are a capacity building organization for nonprofits in Ireland. This presentation, as you can see, is entitled Reaching Out, Supporting Families, right? Let me take you within the presentation to one of their slides. Okay, here's a slide, the title, Creating a Safe Environment for Sharing. Now, if you look at the right side of the slide, you'll see 6 bullet points. Ground rules, keep all information confidential, et cetera, et cetera. That's the main part of the slide that the presenter wants to cover with her audience. But this is just a lot of text on a slide. This isn't interesting to look at. So what they did at CES was they recognized that fact and they said, okay, if we're going to cover those 6 bullets, let's turn them into colorful icons with just a little bit of text like this. So there are those 6 bullets again. So now during the presentation, on the left, that's the original slide. That's what the presenter is using as her script. That's what she will send afterwards as a handout. But on the right, that's what she designed to put on the screen to give people something interesting to look at while she's presenting this material. So you might be saying, well, that's more work, 2 sets of slides. It is, but you can take the slides that you started with where you have all that text. There's your script. There's your handout. It's done. Now strip away most of the text and say, how can I translate this into images so I can have something more interesting on screen? And that's how you build your second set. Something else you can do, we talked about this earlier, is get those footnotes and citations off your slides. If this is up on the screen, first of all, it's too tiny to read. Second of all, there's a link there. Nobody's going to be clicking on that link, so that's not doing you any good. And it's just visual noise. So as I said to the people at the Education Commission for the States, you can put those footnotes in the chat box, so get it off your slide and simultaneous citation, on the right there, or you can just have a slide at the end where you take all those footnotes in your presentation and you cite your sources, and people get that when they get the handout. Here's an overarching principle to pay attention to when you design your slides. It's this. People are going to read whatever text you put in front of them. It's the law. So if you want them to read it, that's fine. Be quiet and let them read. But if you put text up there and you know they're reading it, then either be quiet and let them read it, and then when you speak, add to it, amplify it, explain it. Do not read it to them verbatim. They've just read it for themselves. They don't need you to read it to them. If you want to read something, if you want to underscore something, you can say a few of the words, but as much as possible, try not to read it verbatim. And if you have a lot of text that you want to read, you may want to do something like this. The only exception to this that I can think of, or that's been volunteered from participants in these webinars, is if you know you have people in your webinar who do not have visuals, they are on the phone only, or they're visually impaired and have told you so, you might give the bulk of the audience a chance to read it and then say, I know we have a few people who are not seeing the slides today. Let me take a moment to read this for them. So you can do that as well. And something else to keep in mind, the look and feel of your presentation sends messages beyond the text and images you see on the screen. Style, design equals substance. Here's a slide from Educators for Fair Consideration where they're talking about their vision, okay? Now, your vision should be inspiring, right? This is where we're going in the future. This is where we all want you to join us on this majestic path we're going to travel. But look at the vision statement. We envision in America where all young people can pursue and complete an education. I'm falling asleep, right? It's just words on a screen. Now, deeper within this presentation, they had some wonderful pictures of the kids that they work with. So I said to them, if you're going to talk about your vision, why not put the pictures in the background there so you have human beings, emotional content to go with this visionary, inspiring statement. So be aware that the look and feel of your presentation is sending messages beyond just the actual words and images themselves. Last piece of advice about slides, and this really is the major piece I can give you. 2 words, always build. If you have a slide with multiple elements, whether it's multiple bullet points or different graphics, etc., build the slide gradually in front of the audience to keep them focused where you want them focused and to control the flow of information. Now, here's a slide you're seeing now from one of our early storytelling webinars, this slide is a failure in two ways. First of all, it's about story structure, which could be very visual, could be very graphic, and yet 5 bullets, just words on a page, not interesting to look at. And secondly, all 5 bullets are presented at once. There's no animation here. There's no build. It's just boom, 5 bullets. Let me walk you through it. So let's say I am presenting to you and I'm using this slide and I'm explaining to you bullet number 1 about the protagonist. What does that mean? What does world and balance mean? And I'm explaining point number 1. What are you doing? You're reading number 2, bullet number 2, 3, 4, and 5. You're reading the whole thing, taking it all in. And when you're done, and I'm still talking about bullet number 1, you're thinking to yourself, okay, I've read this now. I've got it. I'll check my email while I'm waiting for Andy to catch up, right? So let's redesign. Now, when we do this story structure, we give people something interesting to look at and we bring it to them sequentially. So we talk about the protagonist, and at that time, that's all that you can see, right? That's it. Until I'm ready to bring in the next element and the next after that, gradually building the slide in front of you, keeping you focused where I want you focused. And the other added benefit is that when something changes on the screen, you know, if your eyes have wandered, that motion, that action pulls your eyes back to the screen. Oh, something's changing here, better pay attention. If a slide is static for too long, then all of a sudden you're doing radio. It's like, okay, nothing's changing there. I can certainly listen. And if radio has taught us anything, it's that we can listen and do something else at the same time, right? You can do this with something as mundane as a bar graph. Here's a slide from one of our clients, the Natural Resource Governance Institute. They're talking about 5 different regions of the world and different manufacturing sectors within each region. But this slide is presented all at once. All 5 bars are there. So if I'm the presenter and I'm dutifully walking you through the manufacturing sectors in South America, bar number 1, you know, what are you doing? You're looking at the other bars, making your own judgments, and then while you're waiting for me to catch up, you're checking your email. But if instead we build the slide gradually, keeping you focused where we want you focused, you've got nowhere else to go, and you're staying with me, and the motion on the screen is pulling you in. Another example, here's a slide with multiple elements, a lot of stuff on that slide, a lot to go over, but if you cover it up and then gradually bring in each area as you talk about it, you can take what is a complex slide and gradually build it in front of the audience and not overwhelm them with information, keeping them focused where you want them focused. Another thing besides animation is to have a lot of slides. For this 2-hour presentation today, there's over 150 slides in this deck. So we are moving. Now, I'm not saying that you have to have a lot of slides. Sometimes you'll stop, turn the slides off, have conversation. That'll keep people engaged. But if you are primarily slide driven, it is kind of a more the merrier thing where slides are concerned. Last takeaway, long-term trends. Take a moment to read this for yourselves. We were curious, you know, this working at home, is this going to continue when we're all able to go back to an employer-provided workplace? So we asked this question. We asked 3 questions. We said, before the pandemic really hit last March, before there were shelter-in-place restrictions where you live, how often were you working from home anyway? And look at this. 19% of our respondents already said, yeah, frequently or always, I'm working from home to some extent. So a fair percentage of people were already in this model. When the restrictions hit, when we were in the heart of the pandemic, how many of you had to work from home then? And 90% were working from home. I mean, we are fortunate, the people who answered this survey, the people at nonprofits, foundations, government agencies, colleges, universities, we were able to continue working from home, 90% of us. But here's the payoff question. When you are able to return to your workplace, how often do you anticipate that you will be working from home instead? And look, 48% said, even when I'm able to return, I expect to be home frequently or always. So all of these recommendations today, everything we're talking about, making the most of virtual sessions, we don't think this is going away. Hopefully we'll get back to the workplace, but a lot of us are still going to be working from home. You're going to have a lot of meetings with remote people. We're going to need to keep doing this. We're going to need to keep staying aware of how we keep the remote people involved. So 3 things to keep in mind. In our survey, we asked people, rate your home or whatever is serving as your workspace for how conducive it is to getting work done. And by conducive, we meant, do you have literally a place to be, enough space with not too much noise, not too many distractions, just the physical plant? Do you have a place on a 1 to 5 scale, 1 being not at all and 5 being, yeah, great. Fortunately, 70% of the people in our survey said, yeah, I'm in the 4 to 5 range working at home. I'm okay. So they got a place. Second, we asked, what about the resources in your place? Computer, printer, internet connection, everything you need to have that home office functioning besides the physical plant. And again, 77% said they were in the 4 to 5 range. So what this is telling us is that most people, yeah, they can do this. They're in a good place working from home. But here's the one thing that created a little bit of concern. When working from home, we asked, how often does the speed of your internet connection or the quality of your connection negatively affect your experience? Because if you got a bad internet connection or if the speeds are slow, all bets are off. It can ruin everything. And here's the concern. 46% said sometimes, frequently, or always, sometimes or more, my internet connection is problematic. So one thing to be aware of with your team, ask them, do they have sufficient internet speeds at home or wherever they are to participate fully in online convenings? And one way they can measure is with apps like speedtest.net, where you can see how fast is my upload speed, how fast is my download speed. As a general rule of thumb, you want download speeds of 100 megabytes per second or higher, and upload speeds of a minimum of 20 megabytes per second or higher. You generally want to be in that range to have a fully functioning home system. Finally, before we get to Q&A, a little more help for our friends, besides what you're going to get today, the slides and the unmuted report. On this issue of accessibility, where I think we could all do better, government agencies have to abide by the Americans with Disabilities Act, particularly Section 508, which insists that all government communications, be they PowerPoint slides or Word documents or what have you, meet certain accessibility guidelines, size of font, color contrast, etc. All of this is spelled out on a website, section508.gov. So your organization may not have to meet government guidelines, but if you want to see what the standards are, check out section508.gov. There's also an organization called WebAIM, WEBAIM.org, that does accessibility training and certification if you want to make sure that you're doing everything you can to make your materials as accessible as possible. If you do a lot of presenting, training, or workshops on the web, particularly if you use slides like we're doing today, I highly recommend listening to the Presentation Podcast. These are some professional presenters and presentation designers talking about trends. And you can see, even going back to the summer, to June and July, they were doing episodes about remote presenting, slide design for remote presenting, and how it's different for slide design for live presenting. So they're free. Sign up, get download presentationpodcast.com. Also, if you go to our website, thegoodmancenter.com, you can get our previous books, Why Bad Ads Happen to Good Causes, study of nonprofit print advertising and why, sadly, so much of it doesn't work. Why bad presentations happen to good causes, for about presentations in person, and our latest report, Unmuted, what works, what doesn't. Now we can all do better when working together online. I want to stop once more for questions and comments. Again, you can put a Q or a C in the chat box and we'll call on you. And let me check with Kirsten. Kirsten, anything that I missed in the last 10 or 15 minutes since our last Q&A?
Yeah, we had a great question from Carol about virtual backgrounds and if you recommend people using them or not. It can be fun, they can be distracting. What are your thoughts?
You know, in general, I think that the rule for backgrounds is they should be pleasant, they should frame you nicely and not be distracting. I'm using a virtual background today because I'm presenting actually in an attic office with a background that looks very dull. So I took a picture of my main office downstairs and made that my background because I think it's more interesting. One thing that can be problematic with virtual backgrounds is you can get like that glow around your head. Sometimes if you hold up objects, you'll see what I'm doing here, they can kind of disappear. So virtual backgrounds can be problematic. The best case scenario is to have a nice background like Kirsten, like you have, which is nice, you know, colorful, alive, but not too distracting. So if you can have a nice real live background, I think you're better off. Other
Great.
questions? Anything else we missed? Kirsten, go ahead.
Oh, we had a request to repeat the speed test info. You gave a few numbers about what the ideal would be, or could you repeat
Yes, once
that?
again, so the website is speedtest.net. You can use this if you're on your computer, just go to the website. It'll give you a chance to click on a button and tell you your speeds. You know, generally 100 megabytes per second or higher download speed and 20 megabytes per second or higher upload speed. So that the upload speed, you know, if I, for example, am offering my video stream as part of this, my upload speed will determine whether or not you see a clear video or a choppy video. Any other questions or comments? Anything else, Kirsten?
We're all clear.
Okay, then a little bit of housekeeping. One last thought before we go, and then we'll have after class time, but for the rest of you, we'll let you get out a little bit early today. So here's some housekeeping, first of all. If you want to stay in touch, if you found today useful, we do a monthly newsletter called Free Range Thinking, which is only about best practices in communications in the public interest sector. Comes out once a month, or just about once a month. Sometimes we miss a month here and there. But if you go to our website, thegoodmancenter.com, on the homepage, just scroll down until you see a place to put your email address, and we'll send this to you once a month for free. And we will not do anything else with your email address, no spam, no solicitations. In between newsletters, if I see something particularly timely and I can't wait for the next monthly newsletter, I'll tweet about it. If you want to follow me on Twitter, @GoodmanCenter. And if you've enjoyed today's class, we do other classes in storytelling, presenting, strategic communications, even how to have good in-person meetings. So check our classes at thegoodmancenter.com. Last thought for the day before we let you go. Does anybody remember this guy? Does this look familiar? His name is Robert Kelly, and he is a professor at Pusan University in South Korea. In 2017, now 4 years ago, he was being interviewed by the BBC because there was an impeachment scandal in South Korea. They wanted to talk to someone locally about it, and so they got him on Skype for an interview. And then the interview went horribly sideways, laughably sideways, so much that he became an internet meme. The interview was circulated over 40 million times on Facebook and Twitter and elsewhere, and we all had a good laugh at Robert Kelly's expense. What we didn't realize was that what we were seeing back then in 2017 was a sneak preview of our own lives. And if you don't remember it, here's an excerpt. Take a look.
Scandals happen all the time. The question is, how do democracies respond to those scandals?
And what will it mean for the wider region? I think one of your children has just walked in. I mean, shifting sands in the region. Do you think relations with the North may change?
I would be surprised if they do. Pardon me.
That's right.
My apologies.
What's this going to mean for the region?
My apologies. South Korea's policy choices on North Korea have been severely limited in the last 6 months to a year.
So my last piece of advice to you today is this. We are all Robert Kelly now. We're working from home. We're professionals. We're doing the best we can, but things will go sideways from time to time. So until we get a chance to go back to the office and be back to whatever it was it used to be, or whatever it will be, we need to give each of us the grace and space to get through this thing together. So thank you for your time and attention. Thank you, Hartford Foundation for Public Giving and the Nonprofit Support Program for giving us this opportunity. They will be sending you the report, unmuted report, a recording of today's webinar, and these slides later today. And if you do have questions or comments we didn't get to or still want to talk to us, we will stick around for after class time. But that's it. Mayor, back to you.
Nothing really to add. Thanks everybody for joining us. And thank you, Andy and Kirsten, for being with us today. And please tell us what you think in the survey. Take care, everyone.
And if you do have questions, comments, or other business, stick around.